Rose was just asking us, oh, well, when, she said, Claudia, when you learned Ayurveda, what was your question? Was it?
Well, was it this condensed?
Was it this condensed?
And concise.
Concise. And oh is the answer. I mean,
Not yes?
No, it was so hard to get any information. Even the nice little chart with the dhatus and upadhatus and the srotamsi where you talk about and how the dhatus are formed, it took me, I'm making this number up, but it must be roughly right, 7 years to get the basics in Ayurveda. And it was so hard, and I listened to beginning stuff, and I read what I could find, and some of it was crazy. And often what it was is like students' notes that Dr. Laud was around, and he had a student who took some notes and then Xeroxed them, and that went around for a while, but it was like full of mistakes. And I was in India, and I really wanted to get into the BAMS program, tried to for a year, and couldn't. And so I was getting some information here and some information there and some information from this doctor and some from this person and a lot on my own. And then when I would run into problems, I'd write Dr. Svoboda and be like, what is this about? When I'd hit a wall, and he'd help me through that. He was never sitting down with me and saying, this is the upadhatus and this is the this. It was not like that. It was just when I would run into a real problem with then I could get in touch with Robert. But it was really hard to find. Now you've got the opposite problem, where you've got so much information that it's hard to know what is the most accurate. It's still there's still different challenges, but it took so long to have it make this much sense. And then took a lot of time in clinic to kind of work it out and see what worked clinically and so forth.
And just imagine 15 years earlier how the situation was.
Well, you had the good karma to be in a BAMS program, at least.
It is true, and that was, and I got to Bombay, I met somebody who introduced me to somebody, who introduced me to somebody, who introduced me to somebody, who introduced me to Pandit Shiv Sharma, who gave me a letter to the college that said, admit this student, all within the space of 3 or 4 days. So that part was good. The being bitten by bed bugs 5 times a day for 6 years was less good. But apparently I needed to
Here's something you can say.
Donate some blood.
Here's something you can say for you.
Yes.
And I would say for me too. We paid our dues.
Yes.
Plus some, with taxes.
I don't know about that, but certainly dues paying occurred.
Dues paying. We paid dues.
Dues
Whether
paying
we paid
ho
our-
gaya.
Yes.
But so what you're teaching now in this, really in the 1 month?
So what we're teaching now in the 1 month.
In the courses that you took and did, how long, would that...
What does this
spread
represent?
out over a year, 2 years, 6 months?
Understanding it
Or just you've collated
as
it
well
the
as again, like probably 7 years of...
Right.
Being actually taught it over maybe, I don't know, a year or something.
Right. That's
Probably.
Yeah.
Being actually taught it. But things may have changed, but back in my day, the way things were done in India was the teacher comes in, tells you a bunch of stuff, and you memorize it, and then it all gets vomited back onto the paper, and then depending on how well you vomit, that determines what kind of grade you get. So there is no strong enthusiasm
To
for
integrate all the
integrating
material.
everything. And back in the Ayurvedic college at that time, there was a big ongoing debate/conflict between whether Ayurveda should be more on the pure side and whatever that meant versus more on the integrated side and whatever that meant. And there was also some political things going, and so there was a very complicated situation of different groups of people jockeying for position and trying to interpret the whole system from a couple of significantly different perspectives. So that also made the understanding the material a little more challenging, because you had some people sure that it meant this, and other people sure that it meant that, and then you'd ask someone else and they were sure it meant another thing.
And I don't know if you had this, but when I went to BHU, Banaras Hindu University, I was studying Hindi there, mostly for the purposes of getting a year-long student visa so I could stay in India for a long time. The classes that I took there, you'd bother to go all the way out there in the heat and misery that is India, and you'd get on your bike and you'd go all the way out there and be hot and whatever, and you're feeling like crap. And you show up, and half the time the teacher didn't show up. And a quarter of the time it was some holiday that nobody bothered to mention. And then the other quarter of the time was, here, memorize this. And
there were riots.
There were riots and buns and,
There were Saduka Julus.
Yeah.
There was all kinds of stuff going on.
curfews. Yeah, so there would be all kinds of interruptions. So a year of classes probably turned out, and I'm making up this statistic, but probably turned out to be about 35% of the time you'd actually have a class when you show up.
It was more of that in Pune. I mean, it was more like 75% in Pune. Part of the reason the teachers occasionally would not show up is because
75% you'd have your classes
Yes.
run, and just 25% not.
Right, because part of the time maybe the teacher was busy off in his clinic or her clinic, but sometimes it was because many of the instructors didn't actually speak English, and they were supposed to be speaking English, at least for the first 2 or 3 years, after which everybody started speaking Hindi. But by then I could understand Hindi, so it wasn't such a big deal. But since they couldn't really speak English perfectly, many of them just avoided coming. And of course, there were many teachers who their idea of teaching was simply to open the book and read, and then in a way that was convenient, because if somebody was reading to you, it's kind of like an audio book. But I was very fortunate because, at least at that time, there were many very good teachers, including, of course, Dr. Lad, and his main teacher, Waidyananal, who was a very brilliant doctor. But there were a number of dedicated people. The anatomy professor was very dedicated. Many of the people were quite interested, though many of them were not at all interested in, or not particularly interested in Āyurveda. Many of them were much more interested in modern medicine, but that was useful too.
Yeah.
It was useful stuff to study.
Very useful.
But integrating everything did not really happen.
No.
And of course, back then, the idea was very much, you went to the college during the day, and it was unspoken, but everybody knew that what you were supposed to do then is find another doctor to apprentice to, and spend your afternoon apprenticing with that doctor and really learning how to put things together.
So that's what I mean. Because this is integrated and condensed, we can feel okay about not totally digestible, really old.
It's kind of
So
like
the question is, wait, let's
kind of like today's cheesecake.
Wait, before
Yes,
you answer,
exactly.
for the people at home. So the question is, so we shouldn't feel so bad about not integrating all of this condensed material right away.
And today at lunch, some of us had cheesecake for dessert. And there was an observation made by my colleague, Dr. Welch here, that a piece of cheesecake is a piece of cheesecake. An entire cheesecake is many pieces of cheesecake.
See, that's just how smart I am. Could you imagine coming up with that?
And while it may be possible to digest one piece of cheesecake at one time, digesting more than one piece of cheesecake over any limited period of time is a challenging thing to do, unless you have
See, you had to be there
Agni
to
Sada.
understand the brilliance of that.
It's all in the cheese.
Is it all in the cheese?
It's all in the cake, really. The cheese is in the cake. The cheese stands alone.
You should not feel bad about not integrating this stuff. Where do you go from here is one of the questions that's up. It's like, where are we going to go from here? What are we going to do? We'll talk about that at the end of the course, and if we forget, remind us. But the important thing is to keep it alive. Somehow keep this alive. Many of you have done it since taking last year. You took at home whenever you took it, but in this room, many people took it last year. and they were able to keep it alive through different ways. We talked about that off camera for a little bit, but some people are working with people, some people are continuing to take classes in other places, keeping it alive until it becomes really integrated, and you really need to work with people to do this, to keep it alive, I think.
And this is also like learning a language. You when you're studying it, you take a lot of notes. You get a lot of recorded examples of how to constructions and so on, and then you have to work with each one. You take an example, and I don't know, the way I do it is wait for an opportunity to use it in conversation. So in this case, it would be wait for an opportunity to use it in a practice. So where you see that it applies, and then once you see that it applies, then it means something to you. So you wait, and suddenly one day you're with someone and you see there is a monkey in a tree, and you can say, "Le singe est sur la branche," and you're very satisfied because you've listened to Eddie Izzard and you've been waiting all this time to. You've already been able to say, "La plume de ma tante est sur la table," because you have an aunt and she has a pen and there's a table.
And there's a table.
And you can take the pen and you can put it on the table and you can say, "Ha ha." But getting the monkey into the tree is not as easy.
That's a whole
so when you
different ball
see
of
the
wax.
monkey in the tree, you can say you're overjoyed because you can say, "Le singe est sur la branche."
Le singe
Yes.
est sur la branche.
Yes, it's very, very satisfying.
Yeah.
So it's the same way with this. You take things out and you wait around and you look around and you think, well, okay, Shukrasar. And then one day you look at George Clooney and you think, whoa, Shukrasar. Now I understand what that is, or whatever it may be.
But you won't think that if you don't keep it alive. You'll forget even the concept of Shukrasar. So you kind of
So when you're
occasionally
learning
go
a
back
language,
and watch the video,
you keep listening to it. You listen to people talk it. You listen to songs. You watch movies and in that language, even if you can't understand anything, so that you'll hear the patterns of the language. You'll hear how people speak them, and learn proverbs. And that's what these subhashita. Yesterday, that Dairyam Mesa is a subhashita. One of the texts that we studied, and when we were in the very beginning of the Ayurvedic college, was called Vaidyakiya Subhashitani. So the sayings that are appropriate for Vaidyas, students of Ayurveda. So these were just, usually two-line verses. And they're easy to remember because they're in verse, and they give you a little perspective on one thing, and you take advantage of that little perspective, and that perspective, you never know where that will lead you to.